The barcode thing it kind of blew my mind because, as you said, I never noticed it before. How come other grocery stores or other brands don't do something similar?
For us, it's strictly productivity. And since we control the product and the packaging, we can put 20 barcodes if we wanted to.
But if I'm like a Haagen-Dazs or something and I'm designing my box of ice cream sandwiches or whatever it is, I would be reluctant to give up some of that additional space to barcodes.
I think so. I mean, if you're a brand, you want to talk about the products and you want to have the romance copy and you want to tell the history of the product. I think they're more focused on that than the retailer's productivity. We're focused on the productivity so we can get the savings for the customer. But you're absolutely right. Adding romance copy and all those great words on the back of
is that what you call it?
Is that the term of art?
It's called romance copy.
I have often felt feelings of romance as I read the back of ice cream packages.
Do you ever like those things? It'll be like Bob and Joe's corn chips, and it's like the story will be like Bob was working at Goldman Sachs and realized, why am I devoting my life to M&A when I could like be devoting it to like design bake? I'm not a fan. I always think I do not need romance copy.
You need to know the origin story of your potato chips, Joe.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Odd Lots podcast. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
Tracy, can I tell you something? I don't know if I've brought it up on the podcast before, but I love grocery stores. I love visiting different kinds of grocery stores. I love produce aisles. I like seeing new ones. I just really they're if I'm in a rush or whatever, it's not so pleasant, but I really like grocery stores.
How often do you do the weekly grocery shopping, Joe?
Well, so we usually buy online, but I go to Key Foods, which is in my neighborhood, probably once or twice a week for things. And even those quick runs, I actually enjoy. I don't really, obviously unboxing is not fun and there are aspects of it that are fun, but as an interesting experience, and I like food. I
will say, I'm starting to become cynical about the American grocery experience, which is terrible because I didn't go to American grocery stores for a really long time. So
what years are you talking about? When you were in Japan?
So I grew up in Japan. I remember going to grocery stores when I came back to Chicago in middle school and just being absolutely wowed by the variation that was there. And,
right.
Literally a kid in a candy store running down the cereal aisle going, oh my God, I've never seen any of these things before. Doing the whole, what's the famous?
The Yeltsin thing. So you could get how at least they spark joy.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. But, now I think I take them as an accepted.
Yeah.
Because now I'm
you get yourself for sure. I
shop a lot at Walmart.
Yeah.
In Connecticut, which is sometimes a soul-sucking experience. I shop a lot at the grocery store that we're about to discuss. I shop a lot at the nearest grocery store in Manhattan.
Which one's that?
That one's a Morton Williams.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm trying to be diplomatic. Just depressing. The price. I ran in there once and I grabbed a cup of soup, freshly made soup, because I was having dinner, a girl dinner, basically. $12 freaking.
I know. The Manhattan specific grocery experience is I would say uneven, to put it best. There are some decent ones, but there's a lot of places that are high end and expensive, and low end and expensive. You know what I'm saying? You go to these places and they're sort of shabby and they're dirty and stuff like that. You're well, at least I'm getting a deal. And then it's actually, no, it's just a worse experience, and also it's expensive.
This reminds me also when my husband first came over from the States to join me here in New York, the first place I took him to was the Whole Foods on Columbus Circle.
Oh, really?
Because I just wanted to show him, look at this grocery store. It's crazy.
There's a new Wegmans at Astor Place, which is where I get off. And I really expected that to become part of my shop routine, because that's where I get on the subway. And it hasn't, I like it. It's cool and they have a lot of stuff, but it hasn't become part of my routine. So there's opportunity still, I would say, for the better Manhattan and just the better grocery store experience still.
It is very true that Manhattan has a shortage of, let's say, lower priced stores, right? We've got the Whole Foods. We have Trader Joe's. Maybe that's
true.
The closest. But we have a lot of Whole Foods, a lot of Wegmans. I'm not even going to mention, what's the one with the G?
Oh, yeah, Gristedes.
There we go. Christie's, Morton Williams,
Yeah.
places like that. But we don't really have
No,
we
it's
definitely
not-
don't have a Walmart.
Well, in Texas, we have HEB, which everybody loves. That's like one of the most beloved brands, I think, in the region. They're like super, and they're huge, and they're clean, and they have good prices, and incredible variety, and a sushi bar and a barbecue pit in the store. Anyway, there's a new grocery store opening up. We're recording this June 18th, and tomorrow, as of the time we're recording this, but tomorrow, like right in Times Square, right adjacent to Times Square, there's a brand new Aldi, which is, I guess, where you shop sometimes when you're in Connecticut.
Yeah, so this is very unusual in my mind because you wouldn't expect a giant grocery store to open just off Times Square.
Yeah.
I think the new location is something like 25,000 square feet, which is just absolutely huge.
Especially for that area.
I can't even imagine actually finding the space for something like that. And then secondly, you wouldn't necessarily expect, I don't want to say a discount grocery store, but you know, like a lower priced grocery store that competes squarely with the Walmarts, the Costcos of the world.
Totally. And and I think they are substantially cheaper by, like, I looked, I searched this. They claim that they're cheap, but also the third party.
Well, we
they
should
claim
just
to be
say
clearly
we
cheap.
already went on a
did.
tour
We
of
got
the
it.
new location.
Yeah, we're a little biased because also they gave us a tour. So this is the disclosure. They gave us a tour and they had all these like little snacks out for us and stuff like that. So I'm already predisposed. I'm like,
But on the plus side, we have personally witnessed the ground wagyu beef for $5.99. It does exist.
but I haven't tried it yet. Anyway, let's get to the conversation. Let's talk about opening a grocery store. Let's talk about, like, how do you actually wring prices out of the system, because that is the story and that is what's exciting for us. We're going to be speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. Scott, welcome to the podcast. We saw you yesterday inside the new Aldi, and now you're here on the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and so glad you could make it out to the store yesterday. It was a really awesome experience to walk through, really, Times Square. Aldi right off of Times Square. Amazing. Let's
just talk about what does the Chief Commercial Officer do? Tell us about, like, what's your actual job and your career at Aldi.
So I actually started with Aldi over 30 years ago. I've been through all the various operations, from running stores to running a warehouse, and I joined the buying department about 11 years ago. So I'm responsible for all of the products in the stores. And that's what I do. We work with the teams who develop the products and get them onto the shelf.
So tell us about the new location, because as we were discussing, Times Square, not necessarily an intuitive place to start a giant grocery store.
Yeah, so Midtown Manhattan, that's our second location in Manhattan. You're right, it's not intuitive.
Where's the first one?
First one is up in Harlem.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have 14 in the 14 in the New York area. One in Harlem, Midtown now, and another opening in Harlem next year, and 2 blocks off of Times Square. You're right. It's a very unique location for us, but a lot of traffic. We have a lot of tourists. We have a lot of commuters. There's going to be a lot of e-commerce, and it's just a great location.
It's a cool space. What was there before, do you know?
It's a brand new building. It's a brand new building with residential on top, and we've taken the ground floor.
Do you think that's an appeal? Like, I think I would like to live above, a grocery store. It seems like a nice, like, amenity.
It's great. I mean, there's going to be residential above us and unbelievable apartments. And to have that convenience for the people who live there, it's going to be great.
Yeah. A lot of cities in Asia,
as
you know now, have mixed use buildings.
Yeah, I love that.
So much
I think it's
like some of them
great.
even have daycares on the bottom, and then the grocery store, dry cleaner. Like, you take care of your entire life within one compound.
I'd be totally down.
So the Times Square location, I get that there's a lot of foot traffic, but how much of it is just creating a showcase for the Aldi brand in an area where there's going to be a lot of visitors, a lot of tourists, versus how much of it is the expectation that this is going to be a really busy location that's actually making profit?
There's no doubt that having that visibility is going to be great for the brand. But to be fair, we intend to be very profitable at the store. We're going to have a ton of customers. That would be a very expensive billboard if we weren't going to sell a lot of groceries.
Can you talk to us about, like, we've done a few, like, produce episodes.
Mm-hmm.
We recently did an episode with on tomatoes with one of the senior VPs at Beldor. That was an amazing conversation. We did a conversation a few years ago about the Hunts Point Delivery Distribution Center in New York, and maybe why it's not the optimal sort of node for delivery. Talk to us about what is the supply chain between, for example, when we entered the store, we were, like, in the produce aisle and tried some grapes, some blueberries that are very nice. Why don't you walk us through, like, what is the supply chain from, like, where that grape comes from to where the distribution center is to the store and that journey?
And that's a prime example of how we buy a bit differently. So we have over 2,600 locations. So what does that mean is we can't just buy from the local market. We start with the grower. I have the opportunity in my role to visit the growers. So we've been to the grape growers in California, in Mexico, in Chile. And it really starts probably 3 to 4 years in advance in partnering with these growers. We go to the fields. We try their varieties. They're all sampled out. And we decide as a company, which varieties do we want them to grow for us? From there, they start growing. We have the contracts, and they grow specific plots dedicated to our business. So, of course, we have the harvest. It goes straight from the grower into our distribution facilities, and then to our stores often the next day. So it's a complicated supply chain, but the key to success is going all the way back to the origin. So whether you're growing grapes or berries or apples, those relationships with the farmers and the growers, that's actually what makes it special.
But in terms of the actual distribution into New York, because we've had conversations with not just grocers, but people who are trying to build things in New York, and they talk about how hard it actually is to get bulky things into the city.
Yeah.
How are you trucking in, I assume, truckloads of groceries every day, and where are they coming from?
So we come from South Windsor up in Connecticut. We have a truck that comes over. We come at night because of the congestion. And you're right, it's very difficult to get a truck, especially into Midtown. And we have to have a bit of a shorter truck. We actually have to have 2 drivers.
Did you say a bit of a shorter truck?
It's a bit of a shorter truck because they can't hit the turning radiuses. For instance, at this store, when the truck comes in to deliver, it's a shorter truck. There's 2 drivers. One to kind of guide and watch the parking and make sure we can cut the radius back in. Another one to unload the groceries. So it's a 2-team just to deliver groceries. And this store is going to get 3 to 4 truckloads a day. So it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of manpower. And it's a logistical, really kind of a symphony to get it done.
Wait, let's just talk more about that. Because when I think, okay, why do we pay a lot for groceries in New York City? Intuitively, that makes a lot of just even the trucking component and the fact that it's, you go out to the suburbs and they don't have to have like a guy like saying like, and the beep. It's like, is there a car there? Is like a kid on a scooter or something like that there? Like, talk to us a little bit more figuring that component out and the 2 drivers and like how that sort of, the math of what that contributes or saves in terms of groceries.
Yeah. And with everything we do, and we're really focused on efficiency. You mentioned, sushi bars and barbecue pits before. So we don't have those.
Yeah, I know.
But when we're going to put a truck, we're going to 2 guys onto a truck, 2 drivers onto a truck, 3 to 4 times a day. That goes into the calculus. Of course, we look at the rent we're going to pay. It's more expensive in Manhattan, no doubt about it. But then we look at the sales. It's just a math equation. We make sure that, yes, there's going to be extra cost on delivery. There's going to be extra cost on properties. That's just a fact. But it goes into the equation.
Okay, you've got trucks delivering the groceries overnight. You have a huge space. I should just emphasize, we saw it.
Yeah.
We ran through the aisles because we never got the chance to run through groceries. I'm going to speed it up 2 times,
to
Joe.
make it look like
It'll
we're
look
running
really
fast.
good. Yeah, that's right. You're expecting a lot of people in that location. How are you going to be restocking the shelves? Because it's a big space, but there are a lot of people in New York. I imagine things will literally be flying off the shelves to some degree. What does that restocking process look like in a crowded city?
Great question. And we have awesome employees at the store first and foremost. But some unique things about how we restock our stores is all of our product comes in a display case. So again, we go back to those supply partners and we say, okay, how can we restock the organic greens? How can we restock the spinach? They put it into a display ready case. We
this
take
is
that
like
case.
A box
it's like
where
a tray.
You can see the items. Yeah,
it's a tray. So our staff can restock, case after case after case, and not have to stack it unit by unit by unit. So we're going to restock that produce 3 to 4 times a day, but we can do it really, really fast.
Joe, did you ever watch Superstore?
No, what was that?
I never heard about the show until recently. It's basically a thinly veiled sitcom of workers who work at Walmart.
Oh, I probably enjoyed
They don't
that.
explicitly say Walmart, but it's obviously Walmart. And I swear to God, 90% of their time is stocking shelves, like unit by unit. That's basically all they do. And talk while
Was it
doing
good? Like, should I watch it?
It's actually it's sort of like The Office, but for giant retail.
Let's talk about, we're going to get to, I know a big part of your thing is that a substantial number of SKUs are private label. But before we get to the private label and how that business works, I just want to sort of clarify one thing. So one of the brands that we noticed that is on your shelf is like Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce.
My favorite.
And so what you're saying is you will work with Sweet Baby Ray's. They're not going to have a custom Aldi Sweet Baby Ray's or change the flavor. But talk to us about the degree to which a a brand provider will modify the sort of delivery package so that it's like ideal for your logistical setup.
Yeah, we are mostly private label, but we do have some brands like Sweet Baby Ray's, and we have them. They will take that case and they'll do a display ready case just for us. So unique to Aldi, and they'll even go a step beyond the display ready case. They'll put 2 or 3 flavors into that case. So for us, again, it's one shelf spot, it's one pallet in our warehouses, it's one slot, and we can get 2 to 3 flavors out of that. So we work with the brands as well, but really within our system.
How do you decide which brands to actually have in store versus when to go private label? Because as you say, like there are a lot of recognizable things, Sweet Baby Ray's, Kraft.
Well, we saw Hellmann's mayonnaise, but we didn't see Heinz's ketchup. So talk about that.
Yeah, there's going to be some what we would call iconic brands, and we know customers love some of their brands. Now, in this market, it's going to be Hellmann's. If you go down south, it's going to be Duke's.
The great American divide.
Do you have Dukes in the southern grocery stores and not? Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So we'll have a few of that. But these iconic brands, think about Coke. Yep. You're going to find Coke in our store. You're going to find Sweet Baby Ray's. They are one of the market leaders in barbecue sauce. You're going to have the Aldi versions of barbecue sauce as well. But we're fine to carry some of those iconic brands as long as they can fit into our system and hit the efficiencies and restocking that we need for busy stores like in Manhattan.
Sorry, not to just keep pressing on this, like Hellmann's versus Heinz's, but you know, I think of like Heinz tomato sauce, the 57 whatever, is like being an iconic
I would have thought
brand.
of it.
Yeah,
as
I would have
iconic,
too.
yeah.
Like I would not have guessed that people are so chill with not having that. I assume it comes down to the data. But when you're looking at, okay, when do we need to have an iconic brand versus a non-iconic brand as our limited ketchup offering? First of all, how many ketchup SKUs do you have?
We have 2 ketchup SKUs.
Wow. And how many would a typical, I don't know, if a typical grocery store have?
Between 30 and 40.
That's remarkable. I mean, that right there is like a sort of remarkable stat. So then what is the data that says, okay, it's okay to like not have a Heinz's, but it would be like a sort of mistake or strategic error to not have a Hellmann's?
Yeah,
at least at this location.
Yeah, there are 2. I would call the data point would be private label penetration. You know, we look at private label, how accepting our customers of private label in that space, in that category. And, you know, for instance, we know in mayonnaise, there are some very dedicated fans. And the debate between Hellmann's and Duke's, that's we're not going to settle that today for sure. But it also comes down to what I call grandma's recipe. Sometimes grandma has handed down the recipe and she calls for a specific brand in her recipe. And we know those items, and we can see that from the data. We can see it on social media. And those are the items that we want to carry in our store. And sometimes grandma's recipe is the reason.
So more broadly, Aldi's is, I'm not sure famous is the right word, but one of the differentiators of the grocery store is that you have fewer SKUs, right? Like you just have fewer products there, or you're more mindful about the products that you're actually putting on the shelves. What have you learned from that process that surprised you at all versus, say, if I go into a Walmart and I've got 60 different types of ketchup staring me in the face, including the new dill-flavored pickle one.
Which does sound good.
Yeah, tempting.
You know, we have 2,000 SKUs in the store, probably 4,000 varieties. Now, let's take the ketchup example. So we just talked about the typical store is going to have 30 to 40 varieties. And as you asked, you know, we have 2. I would simply ask the customer, do you really need 40 choices for ketchups, or is 2 good? We have organic, we have conventional. Is 2 enough? We have the right size. Do you need upside down squeeze, right side up squeeze, small glass, big glass? And we did I'll call it a study, but I'll call it more some interesting walks with customers through our competitors. And sometimes you would stand in front of, let's say, an olive oil selection. Ketchup is 30 to 40. Olive oil could be 50 or 60 different selections, depending on where you're shopping. And what we found was afterwards, the customers felt less confident in their purchase. So we have 4 different varieties of olive oil. 4 is a pretty good selection for our store. You're going to have organic, you're going to have Sicilian, you're going to have pure, and you're going to have extra virgin. Good selection. If you're a consumer faced with 60 different choices of olive oil, how do you know which one to buy? So they were less confident in their choice when they were trying to choose from 60. When you have 4, they felt pretty good about their selection. Unscientific for sure, but to watch the reaction on the customer's face when you walk them in front of it, they were really puzzled with which one do I buy?
This is probably an unfair question on all sides around, but if I were talking to like, what do you think conventional wisdom is in the grocery store business? If I were talking to the chief commercial officer, whatever, Q Food, like, what do you think the conventional wisdom is in grocery about why it's important to have 60 different olive oil SKUs?
It's about selection. The belief is that customers want these different options. And to be fair, customers do want some of those options, and it can come down to shelf space. Which suppliers are paying you to be on their shelf.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes the more you pay, the more shelf space you get. So at Aldi, with our private label, we have 2 ketchups. There's no shelf space. There's no slotting fees. And that's a big difference. So yes, there can be selection, but we need to move those articles through the store very, very quickly.
Well, talk about this further. So again, like a hallmark of Aldi's is fewer SKUs. How does that actually feed into, I guess, more efficient processes for the grocery store and then lower prices for shoppers?
Well, you mentioned the TV show earlier about the people, and I grew up in a grocery store. So I didn't grow up in it. So I worked there in high school, and I was paid probably $3.25 an hour to come in at night and turn the labels and stock everything forward. And me and 8 of my buddies would do that for about 6 hours. And you think about that cost, how expensive is that, to do that in a grocery store? And I was in a small local grocery store. Think about a big competitor who's paying all those folks to do that. Now, our products come in, you're in the case, you only have 2,000 SKUs to put on the shelf. We're not having our folks come in and turn the labels and front everything at night. In fact, they sell out so quickly we don't need to. So that's just one example of all that cost that goes into turning those labels and pulling everything forward. We don't have that.
What does turning the labels mean? So let's walk through some math. Let's say a store sells 1,000 bottles of olive oil a day. I don't know what the number, but that's probably somewhere sells 1,000 bottles. And let's say that store sells 500 brands of extra virgin and 500 brands of organic. And then bottles. And then there's another store that sells 1,000 bottles of olive oil a day, but it's like 50 Sicilian, 50 organic, 50 extra virgin, 50 whatever. Walk us through the math of why 1,000 bottles with the 2 SKUs is going to be significantly more efficient and cheaper from a store perspective than 1,000 bottles with more SKUs.
So when the truck comes in at a traditional grocery store, let's say you have 50 different SKUs, you have to restock them all. That's 50 different cases you have to open. You have to find the 50 different cases. You have to match it up to the spot on the shelf, restock it, make sure you have the right one, get the labels all turned the right way, get the bottles all square. You don't want to drop any. So you have 50 different options. So one person is sitting there with a cart with 50 different cases trying to match them to the right spot on the shelf. Come to the Aldi store. We have 2. Olive oil, we have 4. You can very clearly see this one goes right here. So we can literally restock all of our olive oil in probably 2% of the time that it takes to stock another store. So just think about the math on trying to put that puzzle together of 50 different varieties compared to 4.
Also, your price labels are digital, right?
We are.
Most, if not all of your stores now?
All of our stores are digital.
All of the stores. Okay. How does that help with labor costs? And then also, I have to ask, there's been a lot of criticism of some of these digital labels because people think they're dynamic pricing and that as they reach for an avocado, the price is going to go up by $2 or whatever. How should we think about those?
Yeah, so let me handle that part first. We've heard those same criticisms or concerns out there. We do not do dynamic pricing. We would never do dynamic pricing. Actually, all of our stores have the same price. We change them usually once a week or so, depending on what's going on in the produce
even
market.
The New York store would have the same prices?
Same price in New York as out in Connecticut. And I know that's going to be
it's hard
nice,
for me personally
we'll call it a pleasant surprise for those in Manhattan. When they walk in and they see, chicken breast for $2.19 a pound or eggs for $1.47. So it's going to be kind of amazing. But when we talk about the electronic shelf labels, we were spending between 3 and 4 hours per store per week to change out our signs. So when we switch to the digital version, we save all of that labor. So again, 2,600 stores times 4 hours a week. You can do the math on that. Think about all that savings. Again, that's how we get, the chicken breast down to $2.19. But the opportunity is there to abuse that system, but we will not do that.
So just to be clear, I mean, the reason you were changing out physical labels is because the prices were changing, but you're not changing them on a minute to minute kind of basis.
No, we would usually change them once a week. We have the Aldi Finds area where those come in. We have 100 new items every week. I don't know if we'll talk about that, but we'd have to put all those signs out, take the old signs down. That's a lot of labor to do those things, but we don't have to do that anymore.
This was something I did not know about prior to yesterday's field trip. So the Aldi Find section, I guess apparently your fans have dubbed that the Isle of Shame.
They have.
Right? So this is where some brilliant merchandise, like a true showman, a merchandiser has figured out something. So explain what this aisle is and why it's so iconic to so many. There's like a 4 million person Facebook group dedicated to this specific aisle. What was where did this come from, this aisle, the so-called aisle of shame?
So it actually, to explain the concept, you walk into a grocery store, you're expecting to buy groceries, your soup, your sushi, all those types of things. And we have a whole aisle that's a lot of general merchandise. So we're going to have swimming pools. We're going to have
a lot of seasonal stuff.
Yeah, seasonal. Maybe right now, 4th of July is coming up. FIFA World Cup's in town, so we have those articles as well. The origins of that actually goes back to our origins in Europe. So if you think about European, I know if you've been to Europe, they don't have a lot of the competitors that we have here, a lot of the big box stores.
Right.
So Aldi actually had a pretty big business and still has a significant business selling these types of general merchandise. It could be DIY, it could be paint, it could be power tools. So we took that concept when we came to the U.S., and it's pretty successful. Now, how it's different in the U.S. is it's still very unique that you're going to have all of these articles right next to your groceries. So what we do is we bring in about 100 new items every week. And they're going to be, I'll call it random, but not so random. They're actually going to be the items you need when you need them. So we're not going to carry these articles all year long. We're not going to have an inflatable pool in February. If you look at the competition, they will have that sitting on the shelf. So we bring in the inflatable pool right when you need it. So back to your comment on the aisle of shame. Yep. Which I will say, we do have a Facebook group started by our fans, and it's called the Aisle of Shame, or AOS. And this popped up, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, and we started looking at that as a business saying, what is going on here? What is happening in this Aisle of Shame? And, as a retailer, you're always worried about your brand. You're concerned about your brand. And you see this growing Facebook group called the Aisle of Shame, and you have to ask yourself, what are we going to do about that? So it is 100% driven by our fans. And really what happens is our customers come in each week. They start posting back and forth. Oh, look what I got. I got the pool. I got the chainsaw. I got whatever it is. And they're having a lot of fun with these things. And this group has grown to over 4 million users on a regular basis. So origins of Aisle of Shame, pretty interesting. People were posting onto Facebook, hey, I went to Aldi. I got my ketchup. I got my barbecue sauce. I got my olive oil. And I also got these cute athletic shoes. Uh-huh. And then they were like, I'm so ashamed.
Yeah.
I didn't stay on budget. I'm so ashamed. So they were posting these shame photos from trunks of their cars, from their kitchens. We sell a tremendous amount of candles. People were posting that they had, they would show their family rooms with 50, 60, 70 different candles of all the
shame.
I
and
love
they were
a good
shamed.
scented candle. I fully admit my basicness when it comes to scented candles. But...
So it was shame in a good way. So I think as a brand, we've said, okay, let's not fight this. It's great because people love it. So it's the Aisle of Shame. It's the Aldi finds. And we love that our fans want to post about it and talk about it. And we learn from this as well. So like I said, I run the buying department. And we have great buyers out there. They watch this all of the time.
This was going to be my next question because you've been in this business for a long time. It feels like one of the things that's happened, I can't even say relatively recently, but in recent-ish years, is that social media has become such a bigger force when it comes to shopping. So you have Facebook groups like the one you just described, and you can watch those and maybe get a sense of what customers are liking. You also have social media trends. So every once in a while you have a food item or an Alison Roman recipe that goes viral, and suddenly everyone wants to buy, new tomatoes or a particular type of cheese. How has that impacted the buying process for you?
It is certainly, we have to pay attention to those trends. And you mentioned the feta cheese and tomato recipe from a few years ago, and a great recipe, by the way. And our feta cheese sales went through the roof. So we had to work very quickly with our suppliers to get more feta. More recently, one is the sourdough trend. So sourdough baking at home, the sourdough trend. Now, sourdough is not easy. You got to feed your starter. I would love to do it. I don't have the patience for it, but that tells us and our buying team, hey, what's going on with sourdough? So now we've launched a couple of sourdough items a couple of years ago. It's actually the top performing item in the bread set now. So we are selling, over 500,000 loaves of sourdough every single week in our stores.
Wait, so when you suddenly see feta flying off the shelves, how long does it take you to actually figure out what's going on here and what's driving the additional demand? And then how long does it take for you to respond to it?
And that's one of the great things about being private label, because we're in control of our label. We're in control of our supply chain. We work directly with our producers. So if we were a brand, we'd have to call them and say, hey, can we get more of your brand that you're sending to every other retailer? We go directly to the manufacturer. We say, look, how can we get more line time? How can you dedicate more Aldi product? What can we do with packaging? It can be as quick as a couple of months. It can take a little bit longer depending on the item, but being a private label, we can just pick up the phone, call directly that supplier. Oftentimes it's the owner, the president of the company, and say, look, what can we do about feta? How can we expand your sourdough line? What can we do to help you? And then we partner with them.
I had never gone into an Aldi before, and I'm not sure I would have noticed it had you not pointed it out. But then once you pointed it out, it was quite obvious. So, for example, like on a bag of chips, you have really big barcodes, and either in some boxes, then you notice had like a barcode on every surface. And some had really big barcodes, and it's like, okay, I get that. That's intuitive. It makes the swiping faster. Give us a little history of barcode innovation, and how do you actually sort of like measure the optimal, I guess, ratio of like adding barcodes and figuring out how much that could contribute to faster throughput versus adding barcodes and then like you can't even see what the product is. So like finding that sort of efficient frontier of barcode allocation on a package.
And I think before we talk about barcodes and scanning, we actually have to go all the way back to before we had scanners.
Okay.
So we were actually the last retailer to roll out scanning in stores. So I started with a company in 1995. I showed up on day one, and my training district manager said, I hope you've memorized all the prices by now.
Oh my God.
And I had this look on my face, and I said, no one told me about that.
Memorized all the prices.
Memorized all the prices. So up until 1998, all of our employees memorized all of the prices.
Jeez.
And they would enter them by hand on an old-fashioned 10 key. And so the price memorization was critical to our efficiency. We talk about efficiency and throughput. Now, you could say, why didn't we do scanning back then? Our cashiers were too fast. We couldn't find a scanning system that was fast enough to keep up with our 10 key. So we did two things. One, we started working with scanning manufacturers. And the bi-level scanner, which you may or may not be familiar with, if you think back long time ago, there was one scanner. It was level.
Yeah.
And the cashiers come. So bi-level scanners were essentially created out of our input saying, look, we need to do this faster.
Bi-level, so that means there's the horizontal surface and then the vertical thing,
surface.
and they both have a chance at picking up the barcode.
Exactly. Exactly. So that was one of the innovations that we were pioneering with our suppliers to say, look, how can we move our memorizing prices wasn't the long-term fit for sure. It's very difficult, by the way. But when you have these bi-level scanners, it's okay, there's a chance here. And the second part was on packaging. So I think we've all been in a grocery store and you've seen the cashier struggling to kind of turn the item and twist their wrist.
Or we've been at self-checkout.
You've been at
struggling
self-checkout.
ourselves.
Yeah, so we came up with the idea, and we're just going to add multiple barcodes. So we measure everything we scan, right? So all of our associates, they're measured on items per minute, and we can track the items per minute. So if we're going to do a scanner update, does it pick up scanning faster? We track those items per minute. If we do packaging innovations, and we'll get feedback from our store staff to say, look, this item's not scanning well. So to your example, you didn't notice it in the store, and actually most of our customers don't because we hide it so well. So you can take an article, any item in the store, you will find 4, 5, or 6 barcodes, and until we point it out to a customer, they don't even know it exists. So hopefully people go check their pantry and go, oh my gosh, I never noticed it.
Well, it is funny though. On the chips example, it almost looks like it's part of the bag design because it's like a stripe that basically goes around the whole thing. But wait, now I'm thinking back in the age of when cashiers were memorizing grocery prices. Do you think that had an impact on the monetary policy transmission mechanism? Like, do you think price increases didn't filter down into
because it would have just been too burdensome on the company to make their employees like do another memorization?
Someone needs to do a paper.
Yeah, we should.
Okay, obvious question though. The barcode thing it kind of blew my mind because, as you said, I never noticed it before. How come other grocery stores or other brands don't do something similar?
Because we're private label, these are our products, and we use that real estate. We design the labels. We design the brands. We control the ingredients. We design the labels. So for us, we're based on efficiency. I would say some of our competitors aren't as focused on that. It does take up real estate on the package. There's no doubt about it. But the fact that nobody notices it is pretty interesting as well. So for us, it's strictly productivity. And since we control the product and the packaging, we can put 20 barcodes if we wanted to.
But if I'm like a Haagen-Dazs or something and I'm designing my box of ice cream sandwiches or whatever it is, I would be reluctant to give up some of that additional space to barcodes.
I think so. I mean, if you're a brand, you want to talk about the products and you want to have the romance copy and you want to tell the history of the product. I think they're more focused on that than the retailer's productivity. We're focused on the productivity so we can get the savings for the customer. But you're absolutely right. Adding romance copy and all those Great
Right.
words on the back of the,
Oh, is that
those
the-
take
is
up
that what you
space.
call
Is that the
it?
term of art?
It's called romance copy.
I have often felt feelings of romance as I read the
ever,
back of ice cream packages.
Do you ever like those things? It'll be like Bob and Joe's corn chips, and it's like the story will be like Bob was working at Goldman Sachs and realized, why am I devoting my life to M&A when I could like be devoting it to like design bake? I'm not a fan. I always think I do not need romance
No,
copy.
you need to know the origin story of
don't.
your potato chips, Joe.
Talk to us about what you see in this current state of the art of self-checkout. And the reason there are a couple of things I ask, because it's like, so for example, Uniqlo, which is where I buy a lot of my clothes, I love their self-checkout. It's so, but there's clothes, there's not grocery, but you dump all of the clothes into a bucket, it spits out a price, probably like RFD or whatever, it's done. It's that. And then, so at my local Key Foods, you're like doing the thing where you're twisting. Half the time, like someone has to come by and like swipe something. Maybe something will need an age verification. Maybe like you have to like do it. It doesn't really quite seem to work yet. And so I'm curious what you're seeing at Aldi in terms of where we are with self-checkout technology. I think it kind of drives people crazy.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, some people love it, some people don't love it, and for all the reasons that you said, RFID hasn't come to grocery yet. RFID is a pretty expensive technology when you're talking about selling avocados and tomatoes. So RFID hasn't quite made it there yet. Even the best self-checkout, you're going to have an age verification for alcohol purchases. You're going to struggle sometimes to weigh the produce. So we have it in about a third of our stores. I think some customers love it, but in our stores that have self-checkout, we always have an employee checkout as well. And that's the option to the consumer. I think we're still learning. Retailers are figuring out what works best for them. Do you want a corral? Do you want an attendant? What's the best layout?
What's corral?
So you might want to move people through more of a line, or do you want more of a separated area? So the layout of the self-checkout can have a pretty big impact on the effectiveness. How many people are monitoring it? And by the time you pay someone to stand there and monitor it, could you have just scanned their groceries for them?
Yeah.
Those are the questions that I think all the retailers are facing right now.
I actually think, Tracy, the way the Wegmans does it in Astor Place with the self-checkout is not bad, where they have one line and then like 30 different or 50 different machines, and they're like, you at 25, you at 28. That actually seems to work like reasonably well compared to some of the other versions I've seen.
I think it's fine, especially in New York where people are usually like grabbing a few items and then just leaving.
Yeah.
I could see the argument for self-checkout. But actually, this brings me to what I wanted to ask. You opted for no self-checkout at the new Times Square location. So I'm really interested in why you decided to do that. And then secondly, you mentioned corral versus line. So there is a big space in front of your checkout counters that we saw yesterday. What system is that? And what's the logic behind having that particular system in New York?
Yeah, I think when you think about self-checkout, the appeal in that and a lot of our competitors is their checkout system is pretty slow. So we've already talked about, we have our multiple barcodes, we have our scanner systems. We're incredibly efficient. So we don't always need the self-checkout to speed that process along. Now that space is there. We might decide in the future to try some self-checkout. We want to have the real estate available to change the layout if we think we need it. So like I said, we're still trialing to figure out what works. But for us, if there's 3 people in front of you in line at an Aldi store, you're going to get through so quickly, you may not even need the self-checkout. And I will say, if we've watched people in self-checkout, it's kind of like standing in a fast food restaurant. Which one do you pick? Who's going to be fastest? Who's going to be able to figure out the machine? That can be a bit of a frustration as well, because if you pick the wrong one, you could be waiting even longer, even in a self-checkout.
So the space we saw yesterday, that's just you go up, you decide which checkout you want to go up to. You're not waiting in a single line.
No.
That was my question. Yeah. I found line management really interesting for a few years.
I'm sure it is.
And I kind of wanted to write a book about lines and like the strategy behind lines. So maybe I'll get back into it.
I'm sure that we could do, I'm sure there's a lot of really impressive mathematics behind line and queuing theory and all that stuff. How many different types of green grapes are there? We talked about this yesterday, and I just let you go back to that. You go to the farmers, you pick a grape. Like, how many different options are you looking at, et cetera? Novelty, and we talked about this again with tomatoes. They always seem to be coming out with new tomatoes. Where are we at with the grape market?
Yeah, so the grape market is fascinating because for the average consumer, which we are all average consumers, right? You have green grapes and you have red grapes. You go to the store, you want green, you like red, and you ask a customer, I like the green ones, I like the red ones. But when you get into the details, like I said, we have an awesome produce buying team. There's over 100 varieties of green grapes. So when you go to the Aldi store or the competitor next door, likely you're going to have 2 different varieties. Now, each of those varieties has a different flavor profile, different yield, The farmer's going to, the higher the yield, sometimes the less the flavor. So there's trade-offs and all those types of things. So what we do is, we work with the growers. We mentioned this earlier. We figure, what's the best flavor profile? We don't want the customer to have to think about it. We want them to come to our store, come to Aldi and say, I love the Aldi green grapes, or I love the blackberries. I love the blackberries, and they don't know the details behind it.
Those blackberries were huge.
They were big, and they didn't have
yesterday.
that sort of tart that sometimes make you pucker. Yeah,
and that's another example of picking the variety. So if we were just buying off the market, you're just going down to the local produce market and saying, give me whatever blackberries you have, you're going to get what they have available. Working with the grower, you can narrow that 100 varieties of green grapes down to the 1 or 2 you want to have in your stores. What's in season, what's going to have the right flavor profile. We don't want it too sour. You don't want it too sweet. You want to have good shelf life, produce waste. All those types of things go into the decisions of our produce team. It's actually pretty sophisticated, and it's fine the customers take it for granted. We just want them to come in and say, these green grapes are great. But we've done all the work to figure that out with the farmers.
I want to ask at least one, what Aldi can tell us about the macro environment right now type question. So one of the stories that we've been talking about on the show, and lots of other people have as well, is high produce prices, higher beef prices, certainly, general inflationary pressures on the consumer. And I'm very curious if you've seen that in the spend at your own stores, if you've maybe seen smaller basket sizes, or maybe you've seen people trading down from beef to chicken, that sort of thing. What are you seeing in terms of inflationary pressures on your shoppers?
So shoppers are, I think, they've been under pressure for several years now. And for all the reasons we talked about before, whether it's the case design or the UPCs or going straight to the farmer, we try to keep all those cost pressures down, but we're not immune. We're not immune to commodity markets. You mentioned beef, for instance. Beef prices are at 70-year highs. So we still see our customers buying beef. However, I'll give you an example. Ground beef right now is relatively expensive by historical context. You can talk $5.99 or $6.99 a pound, even at the Aldi store for ground beef. What we've seen is some consumers opting for ground turkey or ground chicken. A nice substitute, a good quality product, still fresh, probably 30% cheaper or 40% less expensive. And that's a good option. Customers are still going to buy their protein. Protein is all the craze right now.
Yeah.
But we have seen some switching between maybe a higher protein, expensive protein like beef, and a lower cost like chicken.
I guess we should ask a question about that protein, all the craze right now. So it's like the problem with all this, there's a lot of confounders, right? Because say a lot's changed in the last 10 years on all kinds of levels. We could talk about the role of social media. We could talk about, obviously, COVID and the inflation, or just COVID and how that made sourdough bread a thing, the hobby. But like GLP-1's clearly part of the story, I think, with the protein boom. What are some sort of like clear data points that you see where you say, okay, like the GLP-1s are changing consumer buying behavior, other than just say, yes, they want more protein?
Yeah, so GLP-1s, we worked with some of our partners probably 18 months ago. And I think it was roughly 5% of the population at that time was on GLP-1s. We'd have to check that. But they also said when this goes to pill form, which is happening right now, we're going to see that adoption rate go up. So as GLP-1s are coming into pill form, of course, we're seeing more protein sales. What's interesting is if you talk to the meat team, and the meat growers out there, they would say we're the original protein. And of course, we're selling more of that. But we're seeing is protein really go throughout the store. Protein bagels.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about protein popcorn, which there's going to be a point when it comes too far. We're rolling out a protein sparkling water. So our data points would say it's actually quite tasty. When you take a protein sparkling water, anything with protein right now is accelerating. I think there'll be a pullback at some point.
Yeah, so the pendulum needs to swing to fiber. Americans need more fiber, not more protein.
Yeah, fiber is coming on as well. Okay, you can have fiber. Bean sales are actually up significantly.
Really?
Oh,
yeah, we're selling significantly more beans.
Wait, is that a GLP-1 thing as well?
It's a fiber. It's a fiber protein combo. Yeah, so we have a Greek chickpea that we've just rolled out, which is actually amazing. And I would say 2 years ago, we wouldn't have carried a Greek chickpea. But now we've rolled out a Greek chickpea, high in fiber. Customers are responding to it. We're rolling out a fiber water, but you're right, more protein, more fiber. And for us, it's making sure we have the products the customers want and being on trend. But bean sales, 5 years ago, bean sales weren't surging. But we're seeing a resurgence in some of these categories that maybe weren't thriving in the past, but now they're starting to come back to life.
That might also be inflationary pressure, because one of the greatest value meals, most filling meals you can ever make is red beans and rice, as I like to say. Anyway, just going back to the sort of competitive advantage of Aldi. So we talked about your own label and how that makes you more efficient, and all of that. We've seen a lot of other stores, I guess, grow their own label options. So Walmart, I think, it's called Great Value or something very obvious like that. And they've been talking about the customer like trading away from known brands into their own Great Value labels because of the inflationary pressures. Have you boosted or have you ever decided to do your own sort of Aldi brand for a lot of these items? Because when we say your own label, a lot of them don't say Aldi. They say, some random farm.
Berman's or what was the bread one?
Something Acres,
right.
something pastoral like that.
But it's not like Kirkland
nice.
where it's like one name that you associate with a store.
Yeah, so we've asked our customers a couple of years ago, we said, how do you feel about the Aldi products? And they said, we love your products, we love your prices, we love your quality, but they don't understand our branding. So about 6 months ago, we made a big announcement that we need to change the way we brand. So right now, we had over 90 different, we'll call them Aldi brands in the store. And you're exactly right. Berman's would be a good example. It was the Berman's barbecue sauce. So we asked our consumers, we said, do you understand what's happening here? Of course, I've worked at Aldi. I'll call it too long. Yeah. When you're an insider, you don't see these things. You're like, okay, of course, Berman's is barbecue sauce and Sweet Harvest is applesauce. Everybody knows that. And the customer said, no, we actually don't know what you're talking about. So we said, okay, what should we do? So we asked them, which brands do you know? Of course, Clancy's is our chip brand. That's actually, a lot of customers knew that brand. Mama Cozy for our frozen pizza. They knew that one. So we're switching from 90 brands down to about 23. Now, that's a big departure. We're going to relabel every product in the store. That's a big shift for the consumer. But even within that, you're exactly right. We're going to put Aldi on the front of the package because Aldi is a great brand. We've been in the States for 50 years. And we recognized, I don't know why it didn't dawn on us earlier, we didn't have Aldi, the logo and the name, on the front of the package. It was always on the back. So now when customers come in, they're going to know it's an Aldi product. Now, the trick is we have 90% private label in our store. So if you imagine a store with all Aldi on the front and it's 90% versus competitors are going to be 25 to 30%, it could look a little bit boring. So the trick is to make sure that we design the labels in a way that it's not boring.
This is my final question. I could have asked a ton of grocery questions, but before it was called private label, like when I was a kid, they were called generic. Yeah. And generic is like basically synonymous with boring. When did the grocery industry sort of figure out that these, quote, in-house brands, that this kind of business should not be called generic and should be called private label, which does not sound as boring. And I think there was a negative connotation. Oh, you bought the generic ketchup? What?
And generic, if you think about the labels, if you go back, they were black and white.
Yeah, I remember.
They were actually poor quality. So it was generic. It was poor quality. It was actually not a good quality, and it was labeled appropriately because it looked terrible.
So when was the moment where it's like, let's like actually make these appealing things?
I think we had something to do with that because in 1976 we opened up with all private labels. So I think we started the private label transition. Now it took a long time for our competitors to catch up. But this is what we've done for 50 years. So I think we started the trend. We started with great labels. We started with good quality. And then eventually you can see that cost difference. So if you're talking 30 to 40 or 50% difference, for us, the consumers resonated with it. Now, if you're a competitor, do you want to sell the branded product or do you want to sell your private label? That depends. Depends on your margins. But we are set up to develop those products. Our whole buying organization has been buying and developing products for 50 years. When I talk about buying, it's easy to buy a branded product. You call up your local CPG, and you say, I want to carry these 5 SKUs. What's my cost? You negotiate a little bit. You have a little back and forth, which is always fun to negotiate. You get a cost, it's on your shelf, and off you go. If I want to do that with a private label, we have to have an idea. We have to have a buyer who says, you know what? I want to have a Greek-inspired chickpea. We have to go find a supplier. We have to create the recipe. We have to sample it. We have to send it over. We put it in our test kitchen. We sample multiple varieties. We say, this is the variety I want. Then you start negotiating the cost, and then you ship it to the store. So it's a whole different business operation, developing and selling private label products, as compared to, I'll call it just buying and selling brands, much more complicated and requires expertise. And that's why I said we've been doing it so long. That's what we're built on. It's easier to just buy someone else's product, but when we're developing our own, it takes a lot of skill, a lot of market research, and a lot of category management.
All right, Scott Patton, thank you so much for coming on Odd Lots. I love talking about food. I'll try to, the Times Square Aldi is not on my typical route, but I'll try to check it out soon once it really gets into some
I
of the
would
things.
go there for the hot honey goat cheese that we sampled yesterday.
We had a good
I would
hot
make
honey
a
goat
special
cheese.
trip.
We'll go there one of these afternoons.
Yeah.
All right, well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Tracy, I thought that was fun. I would genuinely say I learned a lot about grocery store, business operations in the last day, and between that and our trip to the Aldi store. I know more about the grocery board.
No, and it was fascinating just to see, I don't want to say little, but these, what's another word for little? I don't know, just a subtle variety of efficiency improvements, like the packaging system, the display cases, the barcodes everywhere, that in theory could be replicated by other stores, but you don't actually see it.
No, it definitely seems like you have to make a choice, because I would say there's two things. We did that episode on the proliferation of snack foods, right? And one of the trends is we truly live in a golden age of variety, right?
Of SKUs.
Yeah, of SKUs. And it's
SKUs
we talked about how, you can go to a place there are a couple popular Asian grocery stores and see 45 different version of Kit Kats, from green tea to whatever, prawn Kit Kats. And then but then also you're just okay, here is a company that has made a choice to just go in completely the opposite direction. But then you can see it's all right, well, the consumer really doesn't have as much choice, but if you can get them to mostly what they need, then the price differentials seem pretty genuine and real.
The other thing I was thinking is, it feels to me like technology changes are still an understudied area of inflation dynamics. And I mean, just the actual barcodes, switching from physical labels to barcodes, and maybe now having, the tags that Uniqlo has and things like that. I would love to see more research on that particular area.
Yeah, I know. That's because the original is menu cost, right? You can't update the menu.
Yeah.
But it's was that real? And
but now we all order through QR codes.
Yeah, there's been so much change. We should some of those first things need to go back and revisit it. But yeah, all very interesting to me.
Shall we leave it there?
Sure, let's leave it there.
This has been another episode of the Odd Lots podcast. I'm Tracy Alloway. You can follow me at Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal. You can follow me at The Stalwart. Follow our producers, Carmen Rodriguez at Carmen Armin, Dashiell Bennett at Dashbot, Cale Brooks at Cale Brooks, and Kevin Lozano at Kevin Lloyd Lozano.
And for more Odd Lots content, you should check out our daily newsletter. You can find that at Bloomberg.com/Odd Lots.
And you can chat about all of these topics 24/7 in our Discord, discord.gg/Odd Lots.
And if you enjoyed this conversation, then please leave a comment or like the video, or better yet, subscribe.
Thanks for watching.